Good afternoon, everybody. Shall I do a little bit and then
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's not really a kind of formal structure to this discussion. You be pleased or not pleased. But Tim and I speak for myself. I think we have a kind of nice kind of way of talking about things generally. I think it gets quite easy, and we can both talk for Britain, as Jay says. So we should be, I think, okay. And we'll just sort of start off on a bit of a journey, and then, as Jay says, we'll talk for about 45 minutes or something, and then hopefully that will prompt some questions, if not just the kind of why didn't you ask him that one sort of thing.
Or why didn't I answer that?
And why did you actually give a proper answer this time or something?
Yeah.
So I had no idea what I was coming to see today. All I knew was that Tim had been using the gallery here as a studio, and I suppose that set off a kind of train of thought in my mind about what it's like to be an artist working in a studio in your sort of, most artists tend to work in a sort of slightly hermetically sealed private interior space, for want of a better phrase. And I know that there's elements of your work in the past and still really that touches on ideas of the public and the private in other ways. And I suppose I was thinking about this quote from this Owen Shears thing in your book in Venice, which was that as he approached your studio, it was like a dark heart beneath a bright and restless mind. And I thought that was like a really beautiful kind of, poetic phrase for visiting an artist studio. So my first question really was to ask you, how have you found working in a gallery in a gallery space as your studio without all of your stuff around, and with members of the public able to kind of view or not view you on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, as you know, and those who've been to my studio, I usually start off by describing my studio that it's dark, dingy and smelly. It tends to be. It's on 2 floors, anyway. And as Simon asked me this morning how long we've been in the studio, I was horrified to remind myself, of course, to answer the question. I've been there for about 20 years. It's hard to believe, but it's true, in that same space. And what happens with 20 years is that you accrue all sorts of stuff, things that you just, or maybe I should, just simply get rid of, but struggle to get rid of. So there's remnants of past ideas. So in a sense, a studio, depending on how long one's been there, can reflect your life, but also your thoughts as they develop, as you develop through time. So the leftover pieces that I just have abandoned, you could say, just left, gathering more and more dust. They're mine, yes, of course, but they're also mine of my sort of younger days as well, slightly younger days. So that's interesting. So there's baggage, good and bad baggage around your studio, which you collect, and it's also a place of strange comfort, although it's a solitary confinement to a certain degree. I can't speak for every artist, but a lot of artists that I know tend to work in a space confined, which is fine, because that gets a lot of ideas, concentrated ideas, but habits also build up. So when Jane visited the said studio, she kindly said, well, why don't you use the gallery as a studio? So I think, although I was reluctant at first, was I not, and I wasn't being prima donna, but no, I couldn't possibly, yes, you must, no, I couldn't possibly. It wasn't quite like that. It was a little bit of it, just a little bit. But anyway, I possibly did, and it was great because, of course, you as you can see, it's a really, really nice space. It's the kind of space that one would like to have as a studio, in a sense. So if the gallery falls flat, and da-da-da-da. So it's lovely. And what you've got is absolutely no baggage. It purely is a white cube in the real sense of the word. And so with that, you can concentrate your mind. That's a very long-winded answer. But in a sense, it concentrates your mind. These have been current thoughts, these works which we'll talk about anyway. They have been thoughts, and the sketches of them, beginnings of them, you've just seen this morning at the studio. But actually to bring my gear, the necessary gear that I needed, apparatus to make the pieces here, created a different kind of frisson with the language of the work and the material of the work, scale as well. And also, I wasn't thinking of asking the Glyn Vivian if they'd kindly lend me the vitrine so I could show something of figures, and we'll talk about that later. There's a connection there between figures as a launch pad, but also a connection between the space. So I thought, well, that could be something I could bring in. So that's something thought about recently, and the piece on the wall was something did within the last fortnight. Prior to that, those who've been using this space for yoga that's a little advertisement, yoga on a Wednesday evening, I would have seen different works on that, different things, different ideas on that wall. I was full intention to finish that thing, but it just wasn't speaking to me. So I decided to just deconstruct and start over, as it were. So it's like working in a new space, in an empty space, is a kind of refreshing exercise. Removal of baggage, concentrate. And the passerby, well, quick anecdote of that, I suppose. It was meant to be open like this. People see the artists at work. But in reality, I realised within a couple of days that's going to be a real struggle. Because a number of times I had people knocking on the door, I'd go, and they'd say, "What are you up to then?" That sort of thing. Well, it's fine. Good, innocent question. Or worse, ding, ding, ding. Yes. Could you tell me the way to the station? Could you tell me the way to the Kingdom? And so I realised that this is difficult. So then I decided to be totally antisocial and block myself off with the brown, which had brown paper. I was working here. I was chatting to people outside on my way in, on my way out. But there was a necessity to construct and keep getting up and down all the time because of the kind of a necessary concentration.
And did people come in? Members of the public come in
initially? Yeah.
Initially,
and because I wouldn't normally mind that, but because of the nature of the material and a flame, a live flame, it got a little bit difficult. Yeah.
Okay, so that nicely segues into talking about how and why you've made these pieces, I suppose. Yeah, sorry, thank you. That neatly segues into a discussion that we could have about how and why, possibly why first rather than how, you've made these works, and where they've come from, I suppose, in terms of initial idea.
Okay. I won't threaten to read from it, but I suppose in truth the piece behind me, which I've now called Spoken. In fact, I noticed yesterday Jane was harassing me for a title for this work, and in a nice way, no, a constructive manner. And I was at home with Steph, and I said, I think I'll call it Spoken. That sounds all right, doesn't it? Spoken, because they are their utterances, they're spoken. And then I went to the front of the very book I've been using for this piece, which is really just pencil and a couple of drawings and mostly words and boxes and things. And I realised at the front, it was really weird, at the front I wrote down 3 spoken pieces. So it was something that was in my mind when I started this book. I don't know why, but anyway, so that confirms Spoken is the title. But anyway, so it began really, in essence, with this piece, which is featured in the cabinet over there, the vitrine, which is something I did for a chapter show back in 2010. And I spoke to the then curator. I said, well, the main piece I'd like to do is to, for a whole year, for 365 days, get hold of my favourite broadsheet and go through it from cover to back and describe the images in words, all the photojournalist images, which feature human beings, people, figures, and describe whatever circumstances they were in words. That was my first thing. And I didn't realise at the time that I would have moments of regret doing that process, because the idea was to do it every day, and I hadn't realised the distance of 365 days. But nonetheless, I continued with it, and it was fine. But I wanted to look at all the images, the photojournalist images, to describe whatever I thought I saw, what I understood on my terms, with the full realisation that when the photograph was originally taken by the photographer, it would be one of a series of brrrr, as the digital camera runs quickly, taking hundreds, thousands, if necessary, of the same scene, but the camera just moments and moments and moments. Then another process of selection, and then the selection of editing for the newspaper, and then finally print. So I understand that already to a certain degree an image has been read and selected from. So I also understood that me reading would be an image, would have similarities, but would necessarily be different if Simon read the same image, or Alistair. Or if all of us here, let's say there's 40 people in the room, reading the same images, we'd have 40 renditions, if you like, descriptions. So I was interested in that, how we read images, and importantly, the change in circumstances of those people, those figures. So it's a piece which is very, very repetitive because the limit I set myself was to describe them purely in terms of figure. So I've just turned to page 43. It's a very short one on this day. Figures seen against red, figures counting red, shadows in a room, two figures both talking with hands raised like a reflection of each other, figure on a Milan catwalk, figure in orange robes, the guru, cross-legged on a Scottish island, figure on a stage, four figures on a settee, mother and children, figures marching in time, female figure looking over her glasses, young figure in Bavarian costume, many, many figures in the flooded streets of the Philippines, figure, the actor, in England, figures in a group holding their flag, smiling for the camera in Yan'an. So that was one day. That happened to be quite a short burst. But so I carried that through. And that was the piece, figures. So you can imagine when you're going through any paper, really, you'll have something very serious, something traumatic that figures are experiencing. You could turn to the next page and there may be something quite banal or something different. So you'd have all these different sort of sensations from page to page, from image to image. But by deliberately removing the image or ignoring the pictorial and describing only in simple words, it placed the figures as a kind of neutral protagonist in each set of circumstances. It was a long stretch, I know, but the idea was to sort of try and place a sense of familiarity, not familiarity, but a joining of spirits together in different circumstances, from the conflictive, traumatic to the banal. But, like all these things, we break our own rules. So my own rule that I broke on that occasionally was that I couldn't resist quoting from one of the figures in one of the images, just to sort of describe more. And I'm just desperately trying to flick through now to see an example of this. And here we are. Oh God, this is an interesting one on a Sunday. But this is day 71. So I'm describing the same thing, but I've actually quoted someone. This is pure by chance. Three figures lost in the comfort of a world of their own say, "You can't change God's words or the Bible. Jesus chose 12 men as apostles." Unquote. Two figures look into each other's eyes across a red space, figures singing with eyes closed and arms stretched, and so on. But there we are, I quoted something there. And I do that now and again. And I suppose years later after that then, partly because of what I understand to be, we all understand to be quite a difficult landscape, cultural scape we live in at the moment, I just thought, I just wanted to say something in my own way, humble way, about those voices, the utterances, the spoken words by people in difficult circumstances. When a journalist, as opposed to photographing, simply sticks a microphone and just says, say something, and they'll say something. And that's recorded. At this time, as well as papers, then I'd be looking at apps and on sites and things like that, just to expand the horizon. So then I started collecting things that people were saying in this particular time. So, say for instance, I'm scared to eat, I'm scared to lose it all, I'm scared. That's an adaptation inspired by a guy called Michael, who was in a food bank in Newcastle, interviewed by Roger Alston. Roger Alston was the guy who was commissioned by the UN to study the effects of austerity in places of Europe. And one for a fortnight he came to Britain. I think he went to Newport, Wales, Newcastle, Manchester, East London, I think some in Scotland.
Glasgow, you said.
Glasgow, I think it was, yeah. And his whole mission was to invite people to come to a given space and just ask them, just to say what they feel about the situation. And some of the things that people are saying, obviously they're truths for those persons' circumstances. And it's very, very moving to think that this chap, and the reason why he said words to that effect, it's not a direct quote, but I have to say is they're inspired by what I've read, and then I sort of, as I was showing you earlier on, I sort of go through it and I sort of condense it, reshape it, re-emphasise, just to give it some kind of concrete form for these things. But the reason why he said he was too scared to eat was because if he eats what he was talking about, this is at the food bank, if I eat this meal now, I don't know when the next meal that I shall eat to come from. So I'm too scared to eat the one I've got, with the knowledge of not. So there's a real sort of extremity of experience there. Someone really pushed to the extreme. And they all sort of have something of this nature. I can't read this one out. Oh yeah, give me a chance, don't spit on me, just listen, don't piss on me, just listen. And that was spoken by someone who's just come off the streets, has been on the streets for a couple of years, and he was thinking about his experience on the streets, and he was just saying that, and a lot of us know this as a fact, that if you're in a doorway, not everyone, but it just takes one or two to knock your confidence. People will spit and people will piss upon, urinate on someone. And he was just saying, all we're asking for is someone to listen. Just listen. Just listen. So my emphasis was on the listening. Just listen. In other words, listen because I exist. I am here. I'm not just a number. I'm not just a spot or a dot. I am a person. And in a sense, they all have. This is a very long answer. Sorry, I'm talking far too much.
You go.
No. I think I'll stop.
Okay.
Take a breather at least. I'll take a breather.
So that's great. I suppose that makes me think of a whole bunch of things. But the one I think would make more sense to ask was, because I think this flips back into the work as well, is that both in terms of subject matter, but also in terms of formal making, there's a lot about negating and drawing attention to things, whether that might be the image, rubbing things out, putting things back in, or whatever. But in this instance, also identities and actual people. And the first thing I was going to ask you was, how important is it to you? You mentioned this was a guy called Michael and that sort of thing, because to some extent this greater social problem, evil, austerity thing that we're going through is also about dehumanizing and removing the ideas of individuals, and everybody is just a kind of collective data and statistic if you're not careful. So I can see there's a thing that you do in your work in other ways, which here is about isolating some ideas about an individual, but also sort of denying it as well. Can you talk anything about that?
Well, in a sense that, as I say, these voices, these utterances are coming from very specific places and specific individuals and experiences. And I suppose there is a desire or a recognition that what people are saying, it's not just one person saying it, it's a whole host of people that could be saying the same sort of thing. So, it's just extraordinary to think that in Britain, I believe, was the third, if not the fourth, richest country. And yet, somehow, the notion of food banks have become normalised. In the sense that, where's the revolution? I don't understand it. That means I don't understand myself either, for not being more active. I don't know. It's just an anathema, in a sense, to think that there is this power base, there is this extraordinary privileged group of people, and yet there is a whole massive group of people who are experiencing quite something else, just holding on by their fingernails. And I just find that, as I suppose we all do, so as an artist, I just, in some way, I just wanted to document, archive. I'm not quite sure. It's an ongoing series. I don't know where it might end up as a form. But what I'm trying to say is, these people, these brave people, who are speaking for many, many others, and this is an attempt to punctuate for a moment, just hold on to it before they flitter away into another piece of yesterday's news.
You started the answer to your previous question. I'm not doing a Rain Man thing, but where you talked about the rapid shutter of a digital camera making multiple images, and then there's an editing process and a focusing process and a decision-making process. And it made me think about the ideas to do with an image and text, I suppose, and that somehow, traditionally anyway, there was a sort of slight disbelief of the image, and that the idea of something being text was somehow truer or something. If it's in black and white, it must be true, sort of thing. And I wondered whether there was an element of you with this work, on the one hand, sort of trying to make sense of the world for yourself as a person and as an artist, but also somehow fixing something which is vague and making it definite. Do you think, is that a possible reading of what you do?
Something vague, making it definite.
By making it a text rather than an
sorry.
image.
The funny thing is, when I showed versions of figures at Chapter, I've only ever shown that piece once before, in terms of what comes out of that, which are these large vinyl text things that come out representing each day. And someone came up to me, a fellow artist actually, and he was very generous. And we don't know each other terribly well, but he did say this to me. He said, looking at these words, that you've denied the image by describing it in words. He said, well, what I'm now reading, you've given me 1,000 images. Now, and that's not me. That's not my. That wasn't me saying it. That's a genuine response from him. But I was touched by that as an interpretation and his generosity of sharing that moment with me, to say that that's what you've taken them, you've described an image in words, and by doing that, you're creating more images. I don't know what the science of that is, how the human mind works in that way, but I guess it's related to the notion of the multiple interpretation of images, because we're not exactly, well, we are nearly metaphorically drowning in a plethora of images in our age, to the point of there's a word I was stretching for, to the point where it's almost meaningless. And I suppose there's a better word, someone, if you get it, please tell me. Anyway, but extracting from that, and the word at least gives the form, but having said that, the word itself is open to interpretation as well. But at least it's saying, look, that's what that person, a given person, at this given moment in time has said. Now, are those statements universal? Are they timeless? I don't know. I mean, we've always had, I say we've always had, again, that statement frightens me because it suggests that it's another sense of normal. but we've taken for granted, I suppose, that historically, there's always been poverty, there's always been rich, there's always been the haves, and there's always been the have-nots. But I can't answer that. But all I know is that at this moment in time, there seems to be an implosive moment, a difficult moment, that something might just crack.
Yeah.
In a sense that we're coming to, I don't know where it is, but there's somewhere along this developing line of unregulated capitalism that something's going to go amiss, or maybe not go amiss. I really don't know. But it's a fascinating but horrendous time we are in at the moment. If people can piss on people in doorways, or spit on people, there's a spitefulness there, which again is inexcusable, of course. But there is a kind of lack of civility. There was an article, I think a year ago, written by, what's her name? Great journalist, I forgot her name, sorry for the moment. Alice O'Keefe, I think, and she was talking about a growing sense of lack of civility, that's been almost culturally accepted. And I think that's also worrying. We've kind of accepted that this is the state of play. And I don't know, it's a phenomenon.
It's making sense to me, anyway. I suppose in a way what I'm wondering is whether we have a conversation about what those cultural numbing reasons might be, or whether we bring it back to the work, I suppose. I don't know. I think we should do a bit of that, because I was just thinking when you were thinking about numbers of images, and we're swimming in images and stuff. When I was a student quite a while ago now, we had a sort of media studies part of a course. It was a fine art course, and some of us were interested in those sort of things. We were reading all those guys like Baudrillard and all those other semiotics guys about the quality of images and stuff. And I was told a statistic in a lecture that was slightly worrying at the time, and this is a pre-digital age statistic, which was there was enough photographic material produced in the world every day to cover the surface of the world 4 times over. And that was including, photographs that were printed for magazines or for newspapers and stuff. And also included the fact that people took holiday snaps and stuff now. But if you then transpose that to 21st century Britain, where everybody's got 4,000 or 5,000 pictures on their phones, computers with iPhoto, all of that stuff. I mean, we are more than swimming in it, we're drowning in it now. Yeah. And part of that, and it goes back to our discussion earlier today about the Don McCullin show, about being children and reading and seeing those pictures in the Sunday supplements, and it was it became a normality, or there was a sort of numbing of imagery that happened. Whether those things have kind of gone to such an extreme now that really there's no empathy in the world, or there's much less empathy in the world than there should be. And I mean, the pissing in the doorway thing, it's almost like a Clockwork Orange, it has that sort of, the kicking of the tramp in the underpass. I mean, it's sort of that again, still, endlessly, and as if no one's learnt anything. That's not really a question. Sorry.
No, it's a good statement, isn't it? Because it's a true thing what you just said. It feels about accurate. But again, I mean, the underlying repercussions of the multivarious possibilities of having an image, what the connection is into lack of civility, possibly is, I don't know, these are things to think about, that I'm constantly thinking about. People have lost that. There seems to be a slowing down or a thinning out of empathy, and it may be related to something of this current phenomenon, this plethora of the selfie maybe, or the images, or the self-entertainment. It's being in one's life. I mean, I don't know. I mean, although these things are on one level mechanically, universal, they're also extraordinarily insular as well.
Yeah.
So they're out there. You can send your image Instagram and everyone's got it. But at the same time, it's
You're just looking at you're just doing
just in
this,
there.
aren't you?
So
Yeah,
although
yeah.
the world is out there and that image has gone up there, you're actually just doing that.
Well, in a way,
I
that
mean,
comes
that's
back
kind of-
again to the idea of the public and the private.
Yeah.
How we started. You know, it's
Yeah.
you know, those distinctions are possibly, for all of the advances in technology and communicative skills that we should and hopefully have developed.
Yeah.
Those boundaries they're much more blurry and undefined now than they were, you know, and I think some of that sort of political thing at the moment, which is so kind of horrible, it also comes from that, where people are sort of shouting out things from behind a kind of guard, and they don't actually have to confront a human being directly with an attitude or something or an opinion. It can be just, you know, scattergunned in.
Yeah, there is a bit of that. I mean, I was saying earlier on, sorry, we're talking anecdotally now, sorry about that, but one of many fond memories is my grandfather introduced me to the wonders of Question Time. So as a young teenager, we got hooked on Question Time when Robin Day was the person. So we were always, every week there was Question Time. And I grew up with that. And but what I have noticed over the last couple of years, it's got more, I can barely watch it anymore. And I really, I don't know, I just don't, I'm in disbelief. It's become so two poles apart, two groups of people with extraordinarily different ways of looking at the world or expectations of the world. I'm sorry to say, but one feels to be much more aggressive than the other, and the other seems to be dumbfounded in terms of what to make as a response. So people talk about complacency on one side, hence where we are, perhaps. But then there's this other thing going on. So I still try my best to watch it, but, you know, my wife, Steph, will say, are you going to watch it again? And I said, yeah, I'll have to watch it. She said, no, don't. You know you're only going to get upset. You're only going to get upset. And I said, no, I'll be far better this week. And of course I get upset. And I don't think I can get
But
to
it
the
sort
end.
of sucks you in, that's why. I mean, car crash TV is the wrong phrase to use, possibly, but
When you said earlier on, it's become like it's something else. What was it? Something Kyle? No.
Oh, like like a Jeremy Kyle.
Yeah, it's become a bit like the Jeremy
Yeah,
Kyle.
yeah,
Like
it's
that, yeah. And I suppose it has. But there seems to be no discussion.
No, it's just shouting.
So the articulation of where we are, I don't know.
So people are much more entrenched and fixed in their viewpoints and opinions.
Yeah, and one
There's
side,
no
yeah, definitely.
movement on that.
And it's more like an accusation from one to the other before you even utter something. Oh, you're only saying that because, or you're patronising, or you're this. So it's almost like stalemate. We've forgotten is it the forgotten use of language, or is it something far more ingrained, or is it really, what's really happened is that the cover has been wrenched off, and what we're really looking at is how it has always been.
And how do you think art, or making art, can respond to that situation?
Well, that's another can of worms, isn't it, Simon? I don't know, actually. I have no answers for that whatsoever, other than,
I mean, do you have an intention to try and
well, I
do
mean,
that?
speaking for myself, for better or for worse, I can, for better or for worse, I call myself an artist. So I've been making works of some degree for quite a while now. It's the thing I like to do. And this is where we are at the moment, and these are the things I want to do. As you said earlier on, a lot of the time I suppose I've been known, a lot of you won't know my work perhaps, but a lot of the work has been site specific, so I got into the habit of going places and responding, and I've enjoyed that, and it's thrown up all sorts of interesting collisions of thought. But there are other sites as well as geographical sites. There are other kind of cultural sites, and I can work sort of small, two-dimensionally on something to sort of the bridges, a series where I scraped away everything but a bridge, a connecting bridge. And we were looking at those earlier on in the studio.
No,
so
they're fantastic.
Thank you. But these are simply ways trying to understand what these objects or materials that I come across, what they mean for me, and what I think they can possibly mean for others. So I see things as physical and real and material, but also as metaphors, I guess, for where we are. The first bridge, I'll always remember the moment. I dare say a lot of us will. I think it must have been 1995 or 96, watching the news, 10 I think, watching an old bridge in old Yugoslavia, Mostar, being blown up in probably less than 15-20 seconds. And I think it was probably 3 to 4 bombs, that's all it took. But watching this on the news, seeing this bridge that had been a bridge for a long time, instantly gone by pulverizing of just a few bombs. It was shocking for everyone to behold. And as a set of circumstances around that time, after that time, I was looking for something else, but I found this old postcard of Mostar Bridge, which had been sent by someone. It was a classic Wish You Were Here postcard from about 2 or 3 years before, and there was the tourist photograph on the postcard, as it were. Mostar Bridge, isn't it lovely? Isn't it lovely? Isn't it beautiful? Folly, and this or that, oldie worldy. And on the back was the classic. The food's great, the weather's been lovely. We're having a great time. People are lovely, da. Wish you were here. And of course, the signatory of that could never have foretold the events of that bridge a couple of years later. And then began a whole collection of things I sought out then, I looked out for other Mostar bridges on postcards, but then I looked at other bridges and I saw them as these bits of architecture which brilliant engineering, feats of engineering and architecture, which connect one piece of land to another. In the case of Mostar, significantly, it connected one cultural group to another cultural group. And so it was a physical damming of that connection, but a breaking of a social and cultural connection. So then began another passage of thought. That was my illustrated way of answering a question. I think you said about, how I don't know why one makes. Sometimes it's probably healthier to stop making work because some things are unutterable sometimes.
Yeah. When you talk about the bridges and you talk about the sort of politically polarised culture, then lots of the work for me is about it's a number of things, but two of the key ones are about a kind of creation and a destruction, and seeing how it looks and how it's made, but also about a positive and negative. So in a way it becomes about the spaces that could be between things. And I wonder if you, first of all, might agree with that, and if so, could you talk a bit about that, about how you, I think you have an interest in space, in spaces. So is there something about spaces that you could say about this, even though they're text, but or the creation and the destruction in terms of how they're made?
Well, practically, I guess, as a process, these do occupy that area as a means of illustration. So the words are scorched through stencils individually. So you've got a positive scorch, although the stencil is vacant, it's empty. So the scorching, the flame makes the result of the flame, the alchemy makes the positive, and then the scattering of the shrapnel, nails and screws and washers. They're the reverse, so they're the space to the side of the form. And
why the shrapnel one? Why that?
Well, it's I'll refer to it as also, if we talk about this, I suppose, as well. It's that other thing. It's that other it's a counterpoint to the text, which is this which is this thing that bombs are made of. A couple of years back, I went to Somme Valley. I was asked to do some response work to the Battle of the Somme, or the Somme. So I went down to the Somme, 2 years back, I think. And I'm sure some of you might have gone to there. I mean, it's an extraordinary place. I had no idea it would be on such a scale. I'm talking about the number of cemeteries and where the cemeteries are located. I had no idea of the volume, ignorance really, or afraid to understand the truth. But as you walk across the fields, you can walk across these fields, and it's a very, very beautiful area. It's gorgeous, but it's punctuated throughout by cemeteries, which were initially makeshift cemeteries of these, a lot of teenagers, actually, and some others. But they were initially, because that First World War was so bitter and so intense, the bodies were buried at the foot of a hill, foot of a field, or the edge of the field where where they'd been killed. Makeshift cemetery, you could say, cemeteries. But the intensity was such that those cemeteries would be bombed for a second time. I mean, sorry about this, but it's true. And so what you had, the results are the scattering of bodies, and also the scattering of metal. So now you walk across, it's hard to believe it's 100 years later, but you walk across these fields, and underneath you know that there are still fragments of people not yet recovered. But also, as a signifier of that, a reminder of that, you alight upon loads and loads of bits of metal, and they are the shrapnel that was used. And what you're supposed to do is, if you come across bits of shrapnel, the instructions are that you pick them up and put them to the side of the field. And then a farmer comes along once a year, and there'll be a pile of shrapnel, and that's called the iron harvest. So it's an annual thing called the iron harvest of the shrapnel, picking up what's been picked up that year.
And what do they do with that?
I don't know. I really don't know. But it was a very interesting while I had there with a couple of people making the work, trying to get some sort of sense. It was a very difficult place to do work, actually, but it was work of the utmost, respect, as it were. Didn't want to fool around with it. And I've forgotten why I've got to that point. Oh yes, but anyway, it's the stuff of that sort of the bitter end of the opposite of survival. And I suppose earlier on when we were talking about that piece, my reply to you was, it's a bit in a film, one of my favourite films, The Third Man. The two protagonists, and you knew this straight away, which I thought was brilliant, so well done. No, it's fantastic, you recognised it like that. Before I even spoke about it, you relayed the scene.
Yeah.
And it was the scene between two protagonists, Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton, and they're in the Ferris wheel, slowly going around the war-torn remains of Vienna. And the conversation is looking down, and the character played by Orson Welles, Harry Lime, because he's been dealing with dodgy penicillin, black market, and he just looks down at all the dots. I think he calls them dots or ants. Dots.
Yeah, ants and dots. Or something.
Yeah, and he says to the other, well, would you tell me, old man, if I offered you, I can't remember, it might be $10,000 or $1,000 just for any of those dots to stop moving. Are you going to tell me, old man, that you'd resist? And that was his vindication of his dodgy dealing, which had resulted in many, many deaths of children in hospital. So it's an incredible scene. It's a very poetic scene, beautifully filmed. It's a poetic scene, but it's a very real scene.
It's the flip of the film to some extent.
It is, yeah.
I think up until that point, it's the first point where you realise that the Orson Welles character has a reason for doing what he's doing, and he's justifying it because up until that point you just think he's being, he's a criminal really, but actually he's not. He actually believes it. So.
He actually believes it. Yes. It's bear witness to the mad mind. Really, extraordinary scene. So yes.
Yeah. When I first read that, when I came in this morning, and I hadn't really worked out how it all was kind of fitting in, I suppose, or working together. My first thoughts were that it was actually about, and it might be as well, about a kind of conflict and a war. And it was, my first thought was to read that phrase and thinking it was to do with almost like a kind of guilt of survival from somebody who'd survived a conflict. But actually, after reading everything else and talking to you, I realised that it was about the act of survival, just literally surviving. Can you sort of
just surviving. That phrase comes out of, in part, this series behind me, and it was someone from what they call Monteiros. Monteiros is Portuguese for fast blanket. And it was a guy now based in Portugal, and he was talking about himself, African descent, and some of you might have seen some of these people, but they put the blanket down. There's quite a few of them in Venice, and you remember as well. Yeah. They put objects down on a blanket and they knit to sell, tourist trade, and if they're caught by security, they get chased out of town, essentially. And in the worst scenario, they'd be imprisoned for all of that stuff. But he was talking about that they've now formed a cooperative, and they've called themselves the Mantoros, Manti or Mantoras. And he was talking about themselves making objects rather than fake Gucci handbags or something. But they're making objects, or they commission objects to be made, which they'll still sell, but they'll sell, more, above board, as it were. But he was saying the reason, he was talking about the reality of being chased out of town, but he was saying that, you've got to sell something in order to eat, in order to survive. And he was talking about having a T-shirt made called "Survival is Not a Crime." Yeah. And that reminded me of something that I'd read that Mandela had talked about in terms of, it was almost the same words, and it was making a connection with those who were pushed in the extreme of disenfranchisement, pushed to the extreme of disenfranchisement, when they have nothing and they have even less than nothing. Don't be surprised with consequences, because people have to survive. So there is a phrase I found, actually I think I might have it tucked in, I can never remember, I think it's called crimogenic, no, can't remember now. But it's talking about, again, unregulated capitalism. The sociologist David Gordon was talking about the dog-eat-dog society that we've kind of allowed ourselves to become, and crime is kind of almost a part of that bitter end, and it's a real tough one. So I put it there. It's just there, something to deal with. It's a reality. It's someone's reality, but it's also by association it's our reality.
Possibly, I suppose, in the way that all of the other structures of the way we understand the world are being questioned and flipped, then ideas about what is criminal and not criminal may also be blurring, which is an interesting, slightly weird, possibly dangerous scenario. But, just wondering whether we should stop it around now. What do you think? How are we doing for time?
We could
because we could just. I'm just thinking we'll just go. We could. What do you think, Tim? Because we could just go round and round. I think. It's all interesting and stuff, but I'm just. Maybe we should get some other input.
Can I just do this straight away? Just because the graffiti, the kind of the destruction and kind of the idea of doing something political, is actually very much part of all of your actions in what you're doing. Burning, scraping my lovely wall, burning, writing, big holes all over it, that kind of stuff. It's quite violent, but really gentle and very subtle. But it's actually incredibly violent, the stuff that you're doing.
Well, I'm sorry about the wall.
No, I said yes.
But
I said bring it on.
I've got my methods. I will sort it. Got a good team around us. No, I'll use it as a workshop actually for this year's degree students. So beware. A workshop on how to repair walls. Sorted.
Fantastic.
That's one session ticked off. No. But yes, I suppose there is. Yes, it's true. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Enthusiasm there from the gallery.
We need some help.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll do it. Whatever happens, I'll do it.
It is.
It is. Yeah.
It's a white gallery wall, and there was a thing that Tim was telling the story. First day Tim arrived here, got his stuff out, got his balls out, got all his shrapnel, got all his little white suit. You've seen the photographs that I posted up, and then I get this phone call saying, "Oh, Jane, have you got any fire alarms in that building?" I mean, of course we've got fire alarms. So he just said, "Oh, well, I'll ring you a bit later."
That's
so
right.
It was like just see how it went.
Well, yeah, it was smoke alarms, wasn't it?
Yeah, smoke alarms,
and fine, yeah. I suddenly thought, oh God, did I mention this to Jane? This place is going to be full of
It didn't
smoke.
go off though. You didn't.
No, it was all right. It was all right in the end. Yeah.
So would you maybe in a way you're just sort of kind of quite a careful vandal? Is that what it is?
I got no.
Controlled vandalism.
I'm pretty careful, but I'm incredibly impractical. So enough said.
It's good that you say that now.
I wouldn't
towards the
have
end
said
of the
it
show.
before. No. Every time I meet a new curator, I never tell them the full story. I just say it's fine.
This is the violence I was thinking about. It's like a controlled violence because it is. I mean, they're so emotive, and it was fascinating talking about the imagery and the kind of focusing in on the text only because it's about stripping back of what's on and getting to the meat of the problem, and actually just by having the text in front of you, when you say about somebody having an idea of an image, it brings up lots of images. Reading text can. It's like listening to the radio. When you listen to the spoken word, suddenly, you imagine the whole scene. And I think there's a similar thing with these phrases. And they are, I mean, sometimes, well, I haven't read them all enough in a way, but the more I keep reading them, the more I kind of go, oh God, they're really, really upsetting.
You had a question, please.
Yeah, well, I was Tim, I love the rigour of your work and meticulousness. So, for example, the holes here, look at the holes there, they're not just randomly drilled in the kind of very neat. So, looking at the other pieces you've got on the wall here, there are one or two things that I'm intrigued by. One is there are several pencil lines to that. And the one there's a little bit of red that you've inserted. I'm intrigued. Why have you done that?
It's interesting because you asked the same question. It's funny, isn't it? I'll tell you exactly what it is. That's an illustration of me burning too much. So I went through the paper. But I thought, well, do I leave it as a hull or do I protect the remaining bit of ash? So I had rags around the studio from other works left over. So I used it as a patch to stick on the back with some fantastic glue. But also there is that thing, well, it's okay if I go too far in any of these. The thing is, I wish I was more out of control because there'd be more floats of colour. And I'm not a colourist. Try as I may, I've never been a colourist. And I do regret that to some. I'm jealous, I'm envious in a nice way of those who colour. I like colour, but I can't do colour myself. So that's my way in. To use a bit of colour, a tiny bit. But you saw other pieces at the studio which have a few more bits of colour. But maybe I should just do this from now on and do all that and then see what I've got left and then repair with lots of different things. So I think they'd be fine. Because there is that aesthetic sort of quality which I kind of get as well. But repair job, just letting it be. In terms of the pencil lines, I quite again, I enjoy going to shows, seeing work which are unfinished or at least it's like a Cézanne landscape with bits of canvas left. I love those. They're my favourite Cézannes where you have bits of canvas left. He just didn't bother because he thought, well, job done. I've sorted my motif, Mont Saint-Victoire. There's no need to add any more pigment. It's done. The job is done. And I've seen it in unfinished works by Mondrian and in The Hague, I think, where some works were left in the studio when he died, unfinished. But what you have are rather than painted strands, there'd be insulation tape or stuck where it could have been painted and pinned at the back. They're beautiful pieces of work, gorgeous. I like all that. I like seeing the bits which are not yet sorted or just left. And so for that, in a sense, just leave it. I changed my mind. I'll just leave it. I think that says I'm afraid of losing the electric. But when I looked at it, I thought, no, I need to shorten it. I'm afraid of losing it all. Didn't want to lose it all. So then I left it. So it's just there as a ghost. Yeah. Sorry, is that reasonable as an answer, Johnny? Yeah. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, Dave.
You spoke about the difference of your other studio, which is very sort of dark and smelly, and then this one, which is obviously very clean and very bright. Do you think this experience that you're going to go back with being a studio, or is it be a nice respite, but you really enjoy going back?
I should tidy up. The thing is letting go of old ghosts if I tidy up. So I'm still, I'm in the company of my past. So if I clear up, I've lost it. But having said that, it's probably a good thing. Martin Landy destroyed everything. That's a good model, in a sense. Yeah. I think what this does, it's a nice exercise to come to another space. It's a clean, sparkling clean, and a white wall. And when you look at a clean white wall, I was looking at that white wall quite a lot, to the point I think I was dazzling myself. I thought I should be looking at it with sunglasses, because I had the light just bouncing off all the time, and I realised they were doing this in front of me. I thought, oh no, I can't see. But yes, I mean, I think it frees you up a different time. It's been a good experience. Will I go back and tidy up? I'm not sure. A little bit of tidy.
It's all relative anyway. I mean, have you seen those photographs of Francis Bacon's studio? I mean, yours looks like an IKEA showroom in comparison, so you'd be absolutely fine.
It does, yeah. I mean, that's, Hugh Lane Gallery now holds the Francis Bacon studio. It's extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, they created an inventory of his London studio and took the whole lot, every single thing, everything is on an inventory, and all reinstalled at the Hugh Lane Gallery. So it's a great looking space. You can't enter it though, you just see the few bits. But IKEA showroom, mine by comparison. Definitely.
Tim, linking on to the same point, when you were talking about it, you said you brought the equipment you needed. And presumably the big difference between working here with that equipment and working in your own studio is in your own studio there's all the other stuff around, the other media, materials, which you could at any point be tempted and say, why don't I just get hold of that and smear some of that on? So the flip of that question is, when you were here for as many hours as you were, working on these, were there moments where you were frustrated by the limitations you set yourself? Was there any moment where you were tempted to go back to your studio and say, I'm going to bring in some other media?
No, I wasn't actually. No, I see the point of the question. It's a good question, but no, I once I set myself that task, that was it. It was a given. So whatever happened would happen, basically. So no, I just accepted that, and it's quite interesting. It's good. It's a good exercise to do that.
Except for digging into the wall, because that, in a sense, except for digging into the wall, that was in a sense a step further, a step different.
It's another avenue of thought. But having said that, there is actually, I have just told you a lie. So I'm being public. I've just realised, and I didn't mean to do that. There was another piece up there, which you've seen the remnants of in the studio, which I'll continue with something else. It was a piece called Demonstration. And it wasn't quite, it was nearly there. It had good potential, but not quite. And I thought, well, I'll have to make a decision. So it was 2 Sundays ago today that I decided to dismantle it and just to take it away. So then I started thinking about this, and I think it was on that Sunday night, or a couple of days later, I started on the first S, and I realised, oh God, it's not happening. So then I had a thought, right, okay, what I'll do tomorrow, I'll pick up some plaster on my way to work, to uni. I'll go to the studio first, pick up some plaster with the full intention of filling in what I've done, And I picked up some lovely old Progresso graphites that I bought years ago. Really nice, lovely. And I thought, what I'll do, I'll do it, but I'll do it in. No one would mind if I just draw it. And I thought I'd enjoy that because that's got memories of another piece of work. So that's what my intention was. Got to the studio. As I was picked up my Progressos, and then I saw this little box of wood cutting tools, which I'd bought in Janin about 6 years ago, and I'd never touched them. I thought, maybe they'd be right. So I did. So I picked up those, and I went like this tentatively, and I thought, hey, this is all right. So I stuck it. But then my thought was, okay, but if I get to the U, the R, the V, the I, what happens if I get to the V and they go blunt on me? What am I then going to do? Because I've still got the A, the L, the I, the S, the N, the O, T, and so on to go. But fortunately, it was all right. So I shouldn't.
Just sort of survival.
Just survival. Yeah.
See how it goes.
Because it's very even. How could you do that? Because I imagined you doing it with a scalpel, just kind of like scraping it out. Because it's very I think that's the other wonderful thing about that piece. Is for me, it's a bit like the opposite of graffiti, or the opposite of what's left over with fly poster. You know, if you have a fly poster and you get all the stuff that's left all over the wall, it's like you've got the complete negative of that. It's like you've got a fly poster in very neat letters, which is quite an achievement. But I love that sense of what was happening behind that wall. It's such an art school thing, isn't it? The kind of layer, or artists think layers and layers and layers and layers of paint. The new show comes in, and it's kind of like, you know, you kind of reveal 10 years of something. I'm not quite sure what, but very evenly. That's a hell of a job.
That's quite interesting because all of those layers of all those, I'm thinking of that Arte Povera and stuff, which is a sort of, it's not quite poverty, but it's impoverished, and then that sort of links to an austerity thing as well. It's there's a sort of link there.
There is, I suppose. Yeah, there is. I mean,
in a layered way.
Yeah, and I wanted to push it in, so somehow just very delicately, subtly deal with the fabric of a building, of a wall. But the holes obviously go much further in. So there's two layers of going in. One sits on a surface which has gone through a few layers of paint. So there's a pattern of time, as you say, and then the holes are just further in as well. So those are those vacant noises, sounds.
So any particular reasoning behind the little trace of font, or would you have used any?
Simon asked the same question earlier on, actually, in the studio. I got the stencils made because years ago I did a stencil piece with the classic stencils which I bought in a hardware shop in Carmarthen. I always remember that. What was that one? The big one on the corner in Carmarthen.
King Street. Yeah.
Fantastic hardware shop. Anyway, but I bought a set and they were very thin metal, but they were the classic. The font was the classic. What was the term? Danger, keep out. What was that? What is it called? That font. Anyway, it was the classic stencil.
I think
font.
it's called stencil or something, isn't it?
Is it just called stencil?
It's called stencil.
So I thought, well, when I started to think about this, I thought, well, rather than have that association, as it were, nothing wrong with it. I just wanted something which was a bit more easygoing, familiar. So I think somewhere between Arial and Helvetica. I think this is Helvetica in here. A font that you would just get on a normal, on a letter or a normal draft you find these days. So I got a few sizes of these stencils made up, and then for those I just enlarged the same ones to that size. So they're common or garden, usable, contemporary font. Helvetica, I think. I'm sure it's Helvetica. Yeah.
This one, for me, it really relates to the street and how they interrelate as well. If you go into any skate shop, you can see stickers that say skateboarding is not a crime. And that kind of immediately connects it from the pavement and
That's great. Yeah.
And kind of how this text wove into that.
Thank you.
And the graffiti scraping, although it is really neat, so it's in here, but to what Jane was saying, is also, the scapegoat scrapes, whatever it is,
Yes.
I was in a cathedral in Southwark just the other day on a walkthrough with some students, and we were looking at 18th century graffiti, which was very neat letters carved in the soft sort of sandstone, and in a way that's how graffiti I guess wasn't it, before marker pens and stuff. It was, but also quite serifed text, really really beautiful. Yes.
We were talking a little bit earlier about the method of mark making that you use, like burning. And I was just thinking, why, have you used that particular method of mark making? Is it absolutely perfect for the messages, or why have you chosen that particular?
No, I think, to be honest, I've been using theirs. I mean, recently there was a show at Glenveagh, and I think you saw it, the old paper, Touring Hayward show.
Yeah.
And there was a piece of mine in that, and Simon's actually, which I hadn't seen for 20 years. I mean, they got to, whenever it was, 99, 98, 99. And that was a heated nail. And so that was a series of works on paper. I just heated nails and then timed them with various layers, actually, in the original pieces. There were layers. So I was recording, if you like, looking at how a nail cools through paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have a cooling process going horizontally across the surface, but also going through several layers. The resultant burning and cooling and piercing at the same time has a different response. So I was interested in all that, the alchemy of that. But previous works had started with more text work. I mean, in that sense, it's been with me for quite a while. And that would be that notion of scorching, which has a kind of ephemerality about it. Because some pieces of my early stuff used to be on blankets and things like that, which really, the results were like toast. I did a piece called White and White once, Work No Work. I'm thinking of it now, and I suddenly realise how relevant that piece is to this, and I've not forgotten about it, but I haven't considered it. But Gwaith, then Gwaith. Work No Work, and that piece came out of an experience working in Swansea prison. That was my first job in Swansea, and I was in the education department, teaching inmates drawing. And started off for a couple of hours a week, then it builds up to a day or so. And I did it for about a year and gave it up because I've got other stuff. But it's the sort of job you can't really leave. It kind of stays with you because very interesting. I learned an awful lot about myself and culture in a broad sense there. But in the art room of Swansea Prison, I don't know if it's still there, they used to have all the tools were under lock and key. A reinforced glass cabinet, and all the tools were pinned up, and they were shadow painted. Which the idea being that as soon as you left the art class, you and the officers who brought the inmates down had to look at the cabinet to make sure everything was in its place, in its rightful place. So I started to make this afterward, and that sort of clearly influenced the Gwaith and Gwaith piece, where I had a screw, a large 5-inch, 4-inch, and I repeated this performative thing of scorching around it in panels on blanket. And that was shown around, but it didn't last very long because it could only go for about 3 showings before the surface started to come off. It was really like toast, you can imagine scraping off toast. And that was fine, but I quite liked that. I was quite interested in that ephemerality of a statement. Well, there's time and a durational quality in the time, but the delicacy, the vulnerability of the surface, and therefore, in a sense, the vulnerability of the statement itself. So I think in and around that is where that use comes from.
Was that after you reduced by Roger?
Oh, Roger. Well, Roger Acklin was a lovely guy who died a few years ago, and you reminded me earlier on. He was also in on paper, and Roger Acklin taught. Not all the time, he was a visiting lecturer, but he was a lovely guy who taught me on foundation in South London, in Ravensbourne. And he used to use a magnifying glass, for those who don't know, a magnifying glass to use the sun rays to mark time in that way. Beautiful guy, and a beautiful artist, but he died years back. Yeah.
Are you going to like progress these animals in the sense because you do a lot, like you've done quite a lot of video work in the past few things? Because I think like it's kind of the kind of fragility, the rawness of like burning into the material. I think that would be like really beautifully captured like if you filmed it as well.
Yeah, well,
Have you thought like kind of like are you going to like, carry on with it or are they kind of just stay as like 2 dimensions just like?
For the moment, I probably intend to continue this collection, as it were, to get a body of it, then maybe produce it in a different way, I'm not sure, perhaps like a bit like figures, perhaps I'm not sure. But yeah, there's always that possibility of using moving image.
What made you decide to like not bring that into it? Like,
I just wanted to, I think it was partly because I just needed something to be very raw, immediate, and literally a statement which I could handle very quickly. Yeah, I just needed that. And the moving image method for this, you know, it could be, as you say, of course it could find that means, but I just wanted a bit more hands-on. It's nice to be, because I suppose by not overusing, but I have done a few video pieces over the last so many years, and that's all been fine. But I just wanted to remind myself, as much as anything, of materials. You know, I love using moving image video, but at the same time, I really like the hands-on quality, the material, the materiality of the thing I wanted to reconnect with, I think. And I think for this it had a particular kind of urgency, emergency, just needed to get it down. Yeah.
Can I ask you something? Oh no, you can.
Sorry, it's Rihanna.
No, go on. Yeah, sorry. I'll ask it.
I'm just wondering whether it's as I'm listening to you talk about it more and more. I was just wondering if it was a subconscious thing, but the most sort of striking messages are the ones with like the most disruption. So they have the most sort of shrapnel marks and things.
Most disruption?
Yeah, the ones which are the most striking messages.
Well, interesting. I think that might, if that is so, I haven't checked, but if it is so, it's subliminal in the sense that I was saying wrong to Simon. He asked me which came first. So the text goes first, and once the text is down, it's very sort of, you know, there it is. You know. And then it's after that I then respond to what's on the page and then throw the shrapnel down. So subliminally there may be a response, because each time that these small explosions are slightly centered differently. And sometimes they're, as you say, more dramatic, and sometimes sort of a lighter touch. Yeah.
I was just sitting here wondering what your thoughts would be about mass producing these, and I was just wondering about the fact that they represent lots of people.
Yeah.
Each phrase, maybe 100 people, 200 people or more, and was thinking about how they would be shown into the world, and maybe they need to be disseminated more into the world. I was just wondering if they were posters and they were up. You know, what you thought about that? Would that be, you know, is that something that interests you or not interests you, or was it very much about being in a sort of an art space, I suppose? More?
No, it would be good to develop them further. I think it is quite possible that could happen, but I suppose my relationship to the poster design, about 18 months ago I did have some time allocated to spend with a printmaker, very, very fine printmaker, to work on something, and it's put on hold at the moment, purely because, and this is my own inner demons, I suppose, I couldn't find the method at that time to be as responsive to. I like printmaking. I did it when I was at Norwich a little bit, you know, and it was interesting. I really do like printmaking, the methods of it. But it was something for what I was. It was the beginnings of this, in a sense, Trying to find a method of printmaking that had the same kind of immediacy, response, truthfulness. So I haven't found that yet, not in the time that I was allocated, but I do intend to go back. So it's something. But as long as the method I find, I mean, it could be, you could go from dry point, of course, that's very physical and could have something, or you could go into some of the tints like aquatint maybe, or there was something called sugar lift, I remember. Things like that. There are methods, I suppose. I just need to investigate to make some kind of method close to the impulse as possible. So it's out there, just haven't had time to sort of research it. That's on that, and that's part one of my answer. Part two is the one more about poster, and I suppose, that relates to this notion of they need to be disseminated more, perhaps, to make them more public, in the sense that they do speak for an awful lot of people at this moment in time. So I've got to unravel that.
Because actually, when I came to the studio, what I was trying to encourage you was to go off the paper. Because I did discuss with you about the program, and I offered you, I said, the one thing you can do in the space is come off the paper onto the wall. And it's funny how it took you so long to actually get right into that and literally go on into the wall. But that was the idea, was that that you went off, use the space to create the scale. I mean, I think you're right. Billboards, I think you make incredible billboards. I mean, they're really just out there, those messages.
Yeah, something to think about.
Can I just say, we've put the kettle on. So
Should we go get some biscuits?
we could get some
Don't be
biscuits.
sad.
Very welcome to hang around. I'm going to make lunch and tea and coffee. And thank you ever so much to Tim and Simon. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Tim.
You've got to carry on chatting and we'll go make some tea.
Thanks very much.